Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of soft parchment, whispering candlelight, and the gentle rustle of robes moving through shadows into the dimly lit sanctuaries of Byzantine libraries. You're not a warrior, not a prince, not even a monk exactly. You're something even more powerful, a librarian, specifically a Byzantine librarian. Your job, to outlive everyone you know by avoiding any sudden movements, surviving mostly on olives, and ensuring the words of Homer Aristotle and some guy named Theophanes don't fade into oblivion. You probably won't survive this, mostly because no one did except in ink. But still, you're here now, swaddled in wool, hunched over a desk, clutching a reed pen like it's a holy relic. And this is going to be your life for the next several decades. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins as many Byzantine things do in a monastery, not a grand cathedral gleaming with mosaics and gold leaf halos, but a sleepy, slightly crumbling hilltop complex, smelling faintly of old garlic and damp wool. You've just arrived clutching your satchel and an official-looking scroll with your assignment Librarians Assistant Scriptorium 3. Inside, the air smells like dust that never learned to settle. You step through the arched doorway, and immediately your boots echo too loud, too bold. A robed figure turns slowly toward you from a desk carved with sun-worn grooves. His beard seems to have more experience than you do. He nods, then returns to copying what looks like a table of lunar eclipses from the 5th century BCE. You blink. That's your future in human form. You're shown your corner, a bench, a candle, a stylus, and an unfinished scroll. No introduction, no handshake. This isn't a place for grand entrances. This is a place where the minutes crawl and no one dares raise their voice above the scrape of pen against parchment. Everything is beige. The robes, the walls, even the light has a dusty tint to it. Occasionally, a flicker of sun filters through the high, slatted windows, catching on motes of dust that dance like they've been rehearsing for centuries. You sit, your knees creak even though you're not old enough for them to. Your back begins its lifelong journey toward scoliosis. And then your first assignment. A scrap of parchment with a header in red ink well read is generous. It's more of a dried plum kind of hue and an opening line in ancient Greek. Your job, transcribe it exactly. Not creatively, not insightfully. You are a vessel, not a voice. You dip the stylus into the ink pot. It's thicker than you thought. Smells faintly like rust and something herbal. You apply the tip to the parchment and promptly blot it. A fat, inky teardrop splashes over a letter omega, a sin that could get you assigned to sheep herding duty if anyone noticed. But no one says anything. The master librarian, the one with the beard and the haunted eyes, doesn't even glance up. He's deep in the 8th line of something by Galen. You quickly blot your blot with sand and pray to St. Catherine, patron of librarians, though you're not sure she'd even return your letters. Hours pass like centuries. The silence isn't pure, it's layered. A cough, 2 tables over, the slow creak of a wooden shelf under the weight of memory, the occasional sigh, deep and melodramatic, from the monk behind you who clearly wants to be noticed. Or dead. Possibly both. You glance around. Each scribe is a statue. No one stretches, no one scratches. This is a performance of endurance and ink. You're not sure if you're part of a spiritual journey or a very boring cult. Maybe both. Eventually, a bell tolls somewhere above. Not a loud bell, this isn't a church chime, but a soft metallic dong that signals it's time to stop pretending you can still feel your legs. Scrolls are rolled up, styluses cleaned, ink pots covered with ceramic lids like little tombstones. You blow gently on your parchment to dry the last line. The master librarian stands. Without a word, he walks past each desk, glancing down at the work like an emperor inspecting soldiers. When he reaches you, he pauses. Your heart tap dances. He leans forward, squints at your work, then gives the tiniest nod, a movement so subtle you're not sure it happened. And just like that, you're a librarian, or at least a very quiet apprentice in an empire that might fall but hopes its stories won't. You follow the others out, feet shuffling across cool stone toward your next task, a dinner of bean stew, a shared loaf of bread, and perhaps, if you're lucky, a story or two from the monk who thinks everything in Latin sounds slightly obscene. Outside, the stars are already dusting the sky. You wonder how many generations of scribes looked at them dreaming not of glory, but of books that didn't smudge. You rise before the sun now. That's just how it is. The bell tolls in the blue-black dark, and you grope for your robe, which still smells vaguely of candle smoke and dried figs. There's no rush, no one runs in the monastery, but there's a quiet pressure to not be the last one to the morning liturgy. The only sound is sandals against stone and the occasional sleepy mutter of a prayer half remembered. The chapel is cold always, the kind of cold that doesn't shout but settles deep into your bones like a squatter. You stand in rows, hands clasped, trying not to yawn, while a monk with a voice like a rusty hinge sings the morning psalms. You're not quite sure what he's saying, but it sounds important, maybe even eternal. Meanwhile, your stomach grumbles in Greek. After prayers, there's breakfast, a small portion of lentils and bread that could probably break a window. It's not glamorous, but it keeps your hands steady and your mind alert, at least until the mid-morning slump. Then it's back to the scriptorium, where your real day begins not with glory, not with adventure, but with a fresh reed pen and a new scroll. Today you're copying a Byzantine manual on dream interpretation. Yes, really. Apparently, if you dream of frogs, it means impending travel. If you dream of figs, it means your relatives are plotting something. If you dream of goats, well, the less said about that, the better. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were actually believed or simply copied for posterity, but the result is the same. It's your job to preserve them. Your candle flickers as you carefully shape each letter, minuscule Greek, tight and precise. It's less like writing and more like weaving a tapestry with ink. One missed stroke, and suddenly the word for heavenly vision becomes cheap onion, a problem both theological and culinary. Halfway through the scroll, your eyes begin to ache. The parchment is slightly wrinkled, probably made from a goat that lived a stressful life. The ink blots if you press too hard. Your hand cramps like it's sending a complaint to HR, which does not exist here unless you count St. Basil. But there's a rhythm to it now. Your breathing matches your pen strokes. There's a strange calm in the repetition, the kind of peace that creeps in when you stop trying to rush. You almost forget you're surrounded by silent stone and the steady tick of time passing like water on rock. Then, from the corner of the room, a muffled sneeze followed by a muttered curse in Coptic. Everyone freezes. Then, as if on cue, the master librarian lifts one eyebrow. That's all it takes. The sneezer spends the next hour quietly cleaning ink pots as penance for disturbing the flow of divine transcription. By midday, you're halfway through your scroll and exactly 73% through your patience. You stretch your back discreetly, which earns you a glare from the monk behind you, who hasn't moved in 3 hours. He is, you suspect, more statue than man at this point, possibly carved from sandalwood. Lunch is served in silence. More lentils, a different kind of bread, still window-breaking, and a small preserved fish that stares at you judgmentally from the edge of your plate. You eat quickly, then return to your desk, where the dream scroll waits patiently, as if daring you to interpret your own future. Spoiler alert, it involves ink stains and early arthritis. In the afternoon, you're given a brief reprieve cataloging. This means carefully rolling scrolls, labeling them with faded wax seals, and returning them to alcoves so dark even the spiders wear lanterns. Byzantine libraries weren't libraries like we think of today. They were more like fortified memory vaults, windowless maze-like, and organized by a logic known only to their creators and possibly God. You find a scroll labeled Medical Recipes for Noble Women, inside cures for melancholy involving rosewater, pickled onions, and bathing in donkey milk. Historians still debate whether any of this worked, but the handwriting is exquisite, and there's a faint scent of saffron lingering in the parchment, a reminder that once someone cared deeply about not being sad while being fancy. As the light fades, so too does your energy. Your fingers twitch with phantom letters. You think you might be dreaming while awake. The candle at your desk flickers, casting shadows that almost look like words on the walls, like the library itself is whispering. Maybe it is. Maybe the walls have heard so many texts read aloud that they've developed opinions. Finally, the end of the day comes not with a bang, but a bell. You clean your tools, gently stack your scrolls, and stand with the others as the master librarian murmurs a closing benediction over your day's labor. Something about preserving divine knowledge, or maybe just not spilling ink in the margins. You shuffle out into the cool twilight robes brushing against one another like moth wings. The sky is soft purple. You breathe deeply and stretch your arms overhead. Your spine pops like dry reeds. You're not a hero. You're not a saint. But you've preserved 27 pages of dream omens that someone someday might mistake for wisdom. And maybe that's enough. Back in your cell, you light a small oil lamp and stare at the ceiling, which has a crack shaped suspiciously like the letter alpha. You wonder how many other scribes lay here before you, wondering the same thing. Probably more than you can count, possibly all of them. Sleep, as it turns out, doesn't come easily when you spend all day staring at tiny letters under flickering candlelight. You lie in bed, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells faintly of beeswax and old ink, and you count ceiling cracks like sheep, alpha, beta, gamma. Maybe someday you'll get to omega, but tonight you barely make it past delta. When morning finally drags you out of bed, your bones ache like you spent the night wrestling with saints. You shuffle back to the chapel, same sandals, same songs, same sleepy monk droning through the liturgy, like a man reciting a shopping list in Koine Greek. You mumble through the prayers, then gratefully inhale another breakfast of rock-hard bread and lentils with all the enthusiasm of someone chewing through theological drywall. Back in the scriptorium, the assignment for the day is different. Instead of copying, you're correcting. A bundle of scrolls has arrived from another monastery, St. George's, you think somewhere up in the hills, and your job is to check them for errors. You unroll the first parchment like you're opening a gift, only to find the handwriting inside looks like it was done by a goat wearing mittens. You squint at the script, trying to determine whether that's the word for resurrection or raisins. Both seem plausible depending on context. You make a small mark in the margin and keep going, wondering if this scribe had a vendetta against the Greek alphabet. Historians still argue whether scribal errors were honest mistakes or intentional sabotage between rival monasteries. You're personally leaning toward sabotage. By mid-morning, you've found 9 mistakes, one of which turned the phrase eternal light into something resembling slightly sticky lamp. You sigh and stretch your fingers, which now twitch on their own, like they're attempting to unionize. You mutter a quiet prayer for patience or possibly revenge. But there's something satisfying about it too. Like archaeology with ink. Every correction feels like rescuing a word from the abyss. You're preserving not just the message, but the voice behind it. And while you don't know who wrote this scroll, you do know he had a tendency to switch between 2 different styles of alpha halfway through sentences. A bold move and frankly exhausting. In the afternoon, the librarian assigns you to a cleaning task, reorganizing a shelf of vellum manuscripts that have begun to curl like drying leaves. You sigh, grab a soft cloth and a jar of oil, and get to work. There's a kind of reverence to it, handling documents older than your grandparents' ghosts. Each scroll is wrapped in layers of linen, marked with faint, fading ink names of long-dead emperors, forgotten saints, obscure commentaries on obscure psalms. One scroll is particularly strange. It's written in both Greek and Syriac, with alternating lines, as if the author couldn't decide which audience he preferred. The topic, a detailed treatise on appropriate beard lengths for monks of different ranks. You blink. Yes, this is real. Someone spent years composing an argument for why subdeacons should wear their beards 1 inch shorter than abbots. Historians still debate whether this was satire or deadly serious. Either way, you chuckle softly and carefully roll it back up. As you work, a small group of sparrows flits in through a broken upper window. They perch on the beams above the shelves, chirping like tiny gossips. You're not supposed to feed them, but you leave a few crumbs anyway. Monastic discipline has limits. One particularly fat sparrow lands on a stack of scrolls labeled Theodoret's letters to an unnamed bishop and begins cleaning its feathers, completely unimpressed by your efforts. By late afternoon, you've oiled and reshelved most of the scrolls, your hand soft with beeswax and the faint scent of rosemary used to keep parchment from cracking. You take a moment to stand in the middle of the library and breathe it in dust, ink, wax, and time. a perfume only the devout or deranged could love. Dinner is a slightly better version of lunch, meaning there's cheese involved, and that's cause for celebration. No one talks much, but there are subtle gestures exchanged. A raised eyebrow, a half smile, the monastic version of banter. You've learned to read these signs like a secondary language. Monks can be hilarious, but only in a way that wouldn't offend a statue. After dinner, there's a short reading in the refectory the abbot reads from the sayings of the Desert Fathers' ancient ascetics, who lived in caves and talked to snakes. It's meant to be inspiring, but you mostly come away thinking, at least I have a roof and lentils. The stars are out when you return to your cell. You sit on the windowsill legs, tucked up, watching the pinpricks of light flicker across the dome of the sky. Somewhere beyond those stars are emperors and generals and heroes who'll get all the credit in the history books. But down here in the shadow of the olive trees, you're one of the quiet ones, the ones who copy, correct, and catalog. The memory keepers. You go to bed with ink stains on your fingers and a strange sense of satisfaction in your chest. Tomorrow, there will be more scrolls, more mistakes, more quiet victories. But for now, the only thing left is the soft rustling of parchment in your dreams. You wake before the bell not because of devotion, but because your straw mattress has developed a vendetta against your spine. The sky outside is still bruised with stars, and the air smells of damp stone and cold ash. You sit up slowly, stretching limbs that feel older than the empire itself, and fumble for your sandals with the same energy one reserves for revisiting bad life choices. As you make your way to the chapel for morning prayers, you pass the outer cloister where two older monks are already awake, hunched over a brazier, and mumbling about the wind shifting from the east. It's a bad omen, apparently. Or maybe just an excuse for sore knees. One of them nods at you, the kind of nod that says, "Ah yes, another soul cursed with literacy." Prayers pass in a haze, the incense stinging your eyes while your stomach whines for breakfast. You try to focus on the chants, but get distracted by wondering how the candle wax drips so precisely down Father Macar's sleeve without ever burning him. A mystery like most things here. After breakfast, which is exactly the same as yesterday, except the lentils are slightly more sentient, you return to the scriptorium where today's job is reviewing the monastery's inventory scroll. This is no sacred text, no theological treatise. It's a list. A long, exquisitely dull list of inkpots, scroll caps, empty vessels, goat hides, and somehow 3 entire barrels of fermented cabbage someone forgot in the root cellar. You work your way down the parchment, checking physical objects against hand-scribbled notes. The entries are detailed to the point of madness. Wax tablet 1, corner cracked, smells faintly of rosemary. Suspect Brother Alexios used it as a coaster. You sigh and glance across the room. Brother Alexios is snoring softly in the corner, half a quill stuck to his sleeve with dried ink. No remorse. At the bottom of the list, you find a curious entry codex, unknown author, contents illegible, possibly cursed. You pause. That question mark is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Naturally, you go to find it. The codex lives in a box tucked behind a stack of sermons on proper kneeling posture. It's heavy and warm, like it's been absorbing secrets for years. You open it cautiously. Inside, densely packed lines of script, none of which make any sense. Not Greek, not Latin, not even bad shorthand. Just looping symbols and odd diagrams of celestial bodies interspersed with what might be plants or hats. You call over Brother Theodolos, the oldest monk in the scriptorium and the unofficial expert on weird things. He peers at it through thick lenses that make his eyes look like 2 boiled eggs and says, "Ah, that's probably just an old medical manual or a prank." He shrugs and wanders off, humming a hymn about liver stones. Historians still argue whether such unreadable manuscripts were coded treatises, personal journals, or elaborate jokes. You put the codex aside and spend the rest of the morning updating marginalia in a 9th century psalter. It's slow work. The original scribe had lovely penmanship but wrote with the flair of someone being chased by a deadline and a bear. You correct 3 Psalms 4 misaligned strophes and 1 note that somehow suggested King David fought bears with a frying pan. A tempting image, but probably apocryphal. By midday, your hands are black with ink, your stomach growls again, and your right eye is twitching from trying to align a rubricated O with the surrounding text. You sigh and step outside for a few deep breaths. The sun is high, the garden is quiet, and someone has let the goats into the herb patch again. You let them be. After all, even goats need aromatherapy. Afternoon brings illumination duty, not metaphorical enlightenment, actual illuminations. You're asked to add red and gold touches to a folio depicting the book of Genesis. The scene you're assigned, Adam naming the animals. You carefully outline an ostrich, or is it a very smug goose? Either way, Adam seems nonplussed. You dip your brush into powdered cinnabar and try not to think about the fact that it's mildly toxic. Monks used to mix it with vinegar and egg yolk, calling it dragon's blood for flair. Your job is to dot halos and highlight Adam's eyebrows, thick, noble, deeply confused. You're tempted to slip in a small fish with legs as a joke, but you resist, mostly. As evening nears, you review another scroll, this one, an imperial correspondence detailing grain shipments and religious exemptions. It's surprisingly juicy. Apparently, the emperor is furious that a certain bishop keeps claiming miraculous fasting to avoid taxes on imported figs. You stifle a laugh and note the scroll for copying later. The things you learn in footnotes. Dinner is blessedly warm soup. Someone found onions, and it's all anyone talks about. You exchange glances with Brother Dionysius, who makes an exaggerated sniffing motion and nods solemnly as if to say, yes, this is what victory tastes like. The evening ends with compline prayers more subdued than usual, the chanting low and slow. You find yourself humming along, eyes half closed. The candlelight blurs the edges of the icons until the saints seem to smile at you in waxy approval. Back in your cell, you unwrap the curious codex again. Just a peek before bed. You trace the symbols with your finger, wondering if somewhere someone once understood this language. Maybe it's not a joke. Maybe it's a story. Maybe it's just waiting for someone who sees in loops instead of lines. The candle burns low. You close the book, slide it under your blanket like a secret, and fall asleep with a strange image in your mind. A library so quiet, even the ink listens. The morning arrives with a whisper of mist curling through the cloister arches. You wake before the bell again, less because of piety this time, and more because a pigeon has managed to lodge itself somewhere near your window, cooing with the persistence of a bored angel. You sigh, stretch, and mentally prepare for another day, surrounded by dust, ink, and the faint aroma of old sheep hide. Today's duties begin with a visit to the outer archive, a dim, slightly forgotten wing of the monastery where older scrolls and fragments are kept. Not the flashy codices with gold leaf and peacocks. These are the misfits' cracked tablets, partial texts, and bundles of letters tied with ancient string that threatens to dissolve if you breathe too hard. You walk the narrow corridor, your sandals scuffing softly across the stones. The air here is dry and still like it hasn't moved since the reign of Justinian. You pull open a low wooden drawer and reveal what today's assignment entails, cataloging the unidentified fragments bin. It's the librarian's equivalent of fishing through someone else's junk drawer, only more Byzantine. The first parchment is intriguing, a tiny corner of vellum with a partial phrase in uncial script. And thus, with pickled turnips, the emperor made peace. A culinary treaty? A metaphor. A translation error. Historians still argue whether some of these odd notations are political satire, dietary logs, or just grocery lists with delusions of grandeur. You carefully file it under miscellaneous culinary political incidents and move on. The rest of the morning is spent matching scraps to known manuscripts like a sleepy jigsaw puzzle. A leaf from a 6th century homily finds its home next to an oddly familiar marginal note. Don't trust Brother Petros's wine, it says in faint Latin. You chuckle, he's been dead for 200 years, and yet the warning still feels relevant. Your favorite fragment of the day, however, is a doodle. Yes, a doodle. Tucked in the bottom corner of a palimpsest is a little sketch of a monk riding what appears to be a very anxious camel. He's waving a scroll like a sword, and the camel has human feet. Is it satire? Is it autobiography? Is it just a bored scribe losing his grip on reality? Whatever it is, it's going in your notable marginalia report. Lunch today is boiled greens and a piece of bread with the approximate texture of roof tile. Still, no one chokes, and that counts as a good meal. You eat quickly because the abbot has asked you to assist with the indexing of sacred objects. This is a noble way of saying, go rummage through locked cabinets, and write labels on things whose purpose no one quite remembers. First up, a gilded reliquary shaped like a foot missing its toes. Inside is a note written in Syriac that simply says, maybe Saint Simeon. That's comforting. You record it as probable holy foot fragment and move on. Next, a small brass object that looks suspiciously like a doorstop. According to a barely legible tag, it's possibly an incense weight or part of a traveling shrine. You sniff it. It smells like dust and regret. You jot that down and pretend you didn't. You find a tiny bronze bell with an inscription in Old Armenian, which fortunately you can partially read thanks to Brother Anania's endless digressions during mealtime. The bell, it turns out, was used to signal the start of theological debates in the dining hall. A scholarly dinner bell. Now that's peak Byzantine. Back in the scriptorium by mid-afternoon, you're asked to help a novice monk young, nervous, and hopelessly right-handed practice Greek majuscules. His attempts look like someone dipped a spider in ink and flung it across the page. You offer gentle guidance demonstrating the balance of curves and lines. Remember, you say each letter is a little hymn. It should breathe. He nods, then proceeds to decapitate an epsilon. You try not to wince. Still teaching reminds you of your early days. The hours spent tracing letters with a stick and sand before being allowed near real parchment. The excitement of writing your first page without blotting. The pure, irrational joy of a well-executed sigma. Simple, monkish pleasures. Later, as twilight paints the stones a sleepy orange, you help repair the spine of a very battered gospel book. The binding is leather cracked with age, and the thread has loosened. You work quietly, humming a chant under your breath, and gently press the sections back together. There's a certain reverence in the act, like performing surgery on a very devout patient who won't stop quoting scripture mid-operation. One passage catches your eye, an illuminated page featuring Christ calming the storm. The waves are drawn like stylized ribbons, and the boat looks alarmingly like the abbot's bathing tub. You smile and wonder if the original illustrator had ever seen the sea. Probably not. But who needs realism when you have gold leaf? Evening falls with soft bells and the rustle of robes heading toward the chapel. You pause before joining them, looking back at the pile of fragments, the bell with its faint chime, the mysterious foot reliquary. All of it pieces of a story still being told, however slowly. In the chapel, the chanting wraps around you like warm linen. Your eyes close for a moment, not in sleep, but in stillness. You think of that camel with human feet. You think of turnip treaties and scribes doodling while the world turned outside. And for a flicker of a moment, you feel it, the quiet pulse of time, not rushing, not shouting, just whispering gently in the margin of your day. The next morning finds you in the armarium, essentially the librarian's sacred closet. It's less glamorous than it sounds. You creak open the doors and are greeted not by heavenly light, but by a puff of dust so aggressive it might as well be sentient. You cough, wave it off, and begin sorting through the heap of works requested for today's reading. A bishop is visiting from Thessaloniki, and he has intellectual expectations, which in librarian code means he wants to be impressed. You gather a stack of texts that have survived war rats, water damage, theological rewrites, and at least one accidental use as a dinner tray. Some of these are centuries-old beautifully copied psalters, a nearly intact codex of Galen's medical texts, and one curiously specific volume about how to interpret divine messages from sneezes. You're not sure whether the bishop is deeply pious or deeply allergic, but you pack it anyway. You carry the books with the reverence of a man who knows exactly how long it takes to recopy even one of them. The bishop's assistant, a snide youth with an oiled beard and the self-importance of a man who owns 2 belts, grunts his thanks and gestures vaguely toward the guest quarters. You offer a nod so slight it may have been imagined and vanish before he asks for anything else. Back in the main scriptorium, the day's work continues. You've been assigned to oversee a shared copying session which always sounds more collegial than it is. Imagine 4 scribes hunched over separate desks, each furiously scratching away, pausing only to accuse one another of stealing ink or mispronouncing apoktastasis. You take your station with an amused sigh. The parchment is stretched and ready, the ink is fresh, and your stylus sits like a small soldier awaiting orders. Today, you're copying a commentary on the Gospels by one Theophylact of Ohrid, an illuminating but occasionally verbose figure. He never used one adjective when three would do. As you trace his spiraling sentences, you begin to notice something familiar. Yes, you've copied this exact passage before, twice, in two different decades. The words tumble from your hand with eerie ease, as if your wrist remembers them better than your brain. The fringe fact of the day, apparently Theophylact once attempted to explain the Holy Trinity using kitchen metaphors involving honey vinegar and spoons. Historians still argue whether it was an early form of theological outreach or just a bad lunch analogy. Either way, you quietly sketch a spoon in the margin, a secret between you and the parchment. As the sun rises higher, the heat thickens, the candles sweat wax, and your ink dries faster than you can dip. You take a break by opening one of the narrow windows near the ceiling, letting in a breeze and the distant sound of goats disagreeing about something. It's not music, but it helps. By midday, the bishop sends word. He would like to see the library, not just the reading room, the whole thing. You groan internally. This means putting on the performance. You lead him through the oldest corridors, reciting dates and details you've said so often they feel like a litany. Here's a 9th century psalter that survived a fire. Here's a shelf of Arabic translations we received during the reconquests. Yes, that is real gold in the bindings. The bishop asks surprisingly sharp questions, especially about the cataloging system. You explain the complex classification structure based partly on subject, partly on date, and partly on Brother Nestor's deeply personal grudges. The bishop laughs. He asks if you ever get bored surrounded by old books. You pause. It's not boredom, you explain. It's more like a long friendship. Sometimes the manuscripts are quiet. Sometimes they whisper. And occasionally they shout about theological vinegar. He seems to appreciate that. After he leaves, you retreat to the shadowed corner of the library where the questionable relics are kept. This is where texts too controversial or too confusing to be shared openly reside. One scroll details a dream a monk had about a talking fish who preached heresy. Another is a heavily annotated diagram of Noah's Ark that includes an oddly specific number of chamber pots. You settle in to examine one of your favorites, a codex from Egypt written in Coptic filled with early Christian poetry, and curiously a recipe for some kind of lentil stew. The edges of the page are burned, but the verses still shine. You copy a few lines, letting the rhythm calm you. There's something beautifully sleep-inducing about poetry written 15 centuries ago in a dialect nobody speaks anymore, describing virtues with the calm of still water. By evening, the light fades and the library closes its doors with a quiet thud. You return to your cell, where a bundle of dried herbs hangs near the door, meant to ward off illness or possibly demons. You never bothered to clarify. Your knees ache, your eyes are gritty, but your mind hums with a faint, satisfying buzz, the kind you get from spending a day among ideas older than empires. The candlelight flickers as you lie back on your straw mattress. You can still smell the ink on your fingers. You think about spoons. You think about sneezing bishops. You wonder if anyone else, centuries from now, will read your own marginalia and laugh in the silence. And then with the gentle ease of a page turned by wind, you drift into sleep. You awaken slowly to the dim light filtering through your tiny window, the familiar chill of the early morning wrapping around you like a worn cloak. The distant calls of vendors setting up their stalls outside the city walls rise and fall, a comforting, persistent hum. Today the monastery is quieter than usual. Perhaps the midday prayers are drawing more pilgrims, or the city's new governor has decreed more silence near sacred spaces. Either way, you welcome the calm. Your first task is to inventory some recently acquired scrolls from Antioch. These slender papyri are delicate, their ink faded and fragile as a spider's web. You handle them with reverence, gingerly unrolling each one on the reading table, your fingers stained faintly from centuries of ink and parchment dust. These texts contain a curious mix of medical remedies and poetry, a reminder that knowledge was never neatly divided in Byzantine minds. One scroll details an obscure herbal treatment for insomnia involving powdered hyssop and a small dose of opium poppy, a recipe that has historians debating whether monks actually used such tinctures or if the scribes simply copied a curious traveler's tale. You pause, imagining a tired monk stirring a drowsy potion as candlelight flickers, hoping to find rest after hours of illuminated manuscript copying. Next, you attend the morning meal in the refectory. The scent of freshly baked barley bread mingles with the sharp tang of goat cheese and the occasional waft of boiled greens. The monks sit in silence, each mindful of the spiritual discipline that forbids idle chatter during meals. You chew thoughtfully, savoring the modest fare and pondering how different this simple diet is from the rich banquets of Constantinople's elite. Afterward, you return to the armarium to oversee the cataloging of a shipment from Alexandria, a trove of Greek philosophical texts, including works by Plotinus and Porphyry. The volume of material is daunting, and you feel the familiar wave of fatigue roll over your shoulders. Still, the precise task of recording each scroll's details and noting its condition sharpens your mind. You admire the intricate calligraphy and subtle marginal notes left by previous librarians, as if time itself had left its fingerprints here. By mid-afternoon, a young novice approaches you with a question about a particular folio from a manuscript of Homer's Iliad, written in minuscule script. He's struggling to decipher a phrase that seems to have been altered or corrupted. You smile gently, offering guidance while reminding him that many scholars argue whether the Iliad we read is an original work or a patchwork quilt of oral tradition. It's a comforting thought that even the greatest texts have their mysteries. Later, you stroll through the cloister garden, letting the cool shade of olive trees soothe your tired limbs. Bees buzz lazily around wildflowers, and a soft breeze carries the faint scent of jasmine and thyme. The peacefulness of this green refuge contrasts starkly with the weight of ancient knowledge housed inside the library's stone walls. You sometimes wonder if the garden itself is the truest repository of wisdom, the slow growth of life, and quiet cycles of nature. Back in the scriptorium, you take a moment to observe a fellow scribe working on a new copy of a medical treatise by Oribasius. The scribe's careful hand traces delicate illustrations of veins and muscles, a testament to the blending of art and science. It's easy to forget amid the vast philosophical texts that these books were also guides to healing. The curious detail here is that some physicians in Byzantium advocated for music therapy, a concept that has historians still debating its efficacy. As twilight descends, you light a single candle and continue to transcribe a prayer book filled with hymns dedicated to St. John Chrysostom. The soothing repetition of the verses and the gentle scratch of quill on parchment form a lullaby of sorts. You let your thoughts wander to the thousands of pages you've handled, each a whisper from the past, and the countless unnamed hands that once held them. When the lights are finally extinguished and silence blankets the monastery, you feel a deep contentment. Here, surrounded by fragile words and fading ink, you are part of a timeless tradition. The long, quiet life of a Byzantine librarian is not one of grand gestures or loud triumphs, but of steady guardianship preserving knowledge so that others may one day read, wonder, and dream. You rise with the soft glow of dawn filtering through your window, feeling the cool stone floor beneath your feet as you step into the quiet halls of the monastery. The distant toll of the bell marks the start of the day's devotions, a rhythm that governs every moment in this place of endless learning and silent patience. As you walk toward the armarium, you breathe in the familiar scent of aged parchment mixed with the faint hint of beeswax from the candles. Today's focus is the preservation of a rare manuscript from the 6th century, an ancient codex on agricultural techniques used in the Byzantine provinces. The leather binding is cracked, and the vellum pages show signs of moisture damage, but the content inside remains a treasure trove. You delicately remove the codex from its shelf, feeling the weight of centuries in your hands. The detailed drawings of plows and irrigation channels transport you to distant fields where peasants toiled under the Mediterranean sun. While carefully turning each page, you come across curious notes written in the margins, annotations by a 9th century farmer or perhaps a monk who had some practical experience in farming. This blend of scholarly precision and everyday wisdom is a hallmark of Byzantine manuscripts, and it's a gentle reminder that learning was meant to be lived, not just read about. You muse on the notion that even the most boring technical manuals hold stories of human lives and toil. After some hours, you set the manuscript aside and move to another task, preparing parchment for future copying. You watch as a young apprentice stretches a fresh calfskin, smoothing it with a pumice stone until it gleams under the flickering candlelight. It's a slow and delicate process, one that demands patience and a steady hand, qualities you've cultivated over many years here. You joke quietly to yourself that the parchment might take longer to prepare than the scribe to fill it with text. Later, you assist in arranging a new shipment of papyri from Alexandria. The exotic smell of the reed fibers reminds you of tales from travelers who crossed the Red Sea and traded stories alongside goods. Among the scrolls is a fascinating treatise on Byzantine culinary habits, including recipes that call for spices like cinnamon and black pepper luxuries that historians still debate were widely available or reserved for the wealthy elite. Lunch is a modest affair, a bowl of lentil stew with fragrant herbs and a piece of coarse bread. The meal is eaten in silence, punctuated only by the occasional clink of wooden spoons. You relish the simple flavors and the quiet companionship of your fellow librarians, each absorbed in their own thoughts and tasks. The afternoon brings a visitor, a visiting scholar from Thessaloniki, keen to inspect the library's collection of Greek myths. Together, you pore over illuminated manuscripts featuring subtle variations of the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. You point out how these versions differ slightly from more familiar renditions reflecting regional storytelling traditions. You mention that some scholars argue whether these myths were intended as mere entertainment or if they held deeper philosophical meanings. As the sun begins to lower, you retreat to a corner of the library to read a recently completed translation of a Syriac medical text. The intricate descriptions of herbal remedies and healing rituals captivate you, their poetic language softening the clinical details. It's humbling to think that these texts traveled vast distances, carried by traders and monks, bridging cultures and epochs. Evening prayers summon you back to the chapel, where chants rise and fall in harmonious waves. The soothing cadences remind you that knowledge and faith have long been intertwined, here offering solace to weary minds. You leave with a sense of calm purpose, knowing your work contributes to a continuum of care and scholarship stretching across centuries. Before retiring to your chamber, you pause at the window, gazing at the city lights twinkling in the distance. You imagine the countless hands that have touched these books, the silent guardianship of knowledge passing from one librarian to the next, a quiet legacy that outlasts empires and emperors alike. The morning light filters softly through the lattice windows, casting intricate patterns across the stone floor as you settle into your workspace. Today, you begin the meticulous task of restoring a damaged manuscript from the library's more neglected collection, a Byzantine legal codex, its pages brittle and edges worn. The codex's laws and decrees once shaped the lives of millions, yet now it rests quietly here, a fragile relic whispering stories of order and governance. You carefully examine the ink, which has faded to a gentle sepia tone. Some letters seem to have been re-inked by a later hand, evidence of scribes' efforts to preserve the text for posterity. The restoration work is delicate. You apply a light layer of a special adhesive made from natural gums to stabilize the parchment. It's a painstaking process, one that requires steady breathing and patience, qualities you've honed through years of tending to ancient books. As you work, you reflect on how Byzantine law differed from Roman precedents. This codex reveals peculiar regulations, such as the mandated hours for city markets and specific fines for letting one's animals roam freely, details historians still debate whether reflected strict enforcement or more relaxed local customs. The legal world of Byzantium wasn't just about crime and punishment. It was a framework that shaped daily rhythms and social order. After the morning's restoration, you turn your attention to a manuscript filled with hymns, composed by Romanos the melodist, a revered figure whose poetry was sung throughout the empire's churches. The text is beautifully illuminated with gold leaf and vibrant pigments, though some areas have faded from exposure to light and time. You admire the craftsmanship, imagining the quiet devotion required to create such sacred art, each brushstroke a prayer. Your midday meal is a simple affair: boiled chickpeas with herbs and a chunk of aged cheese. The flavors are humble but satisfying, and the quiet chatter among your fellow librarians is a gentle soundtrack to the slow pace of the afternoon. You sip warm water infused with mint, a remedy often praised in Byzantine households for soothing digestion and calming nerves. In the afternoon, a local monk approaches with a question about the origin of a peculiar proverb found in one of the manuscripts. The phrase references the silent bee, a metaphor whose meaning has puzzled scholars for centuries. You share your thoughts, noting that some believe it symbolizes the hidden wisdom of the monastic life, while others suggest it refers to the secretive ways of scribes themselves. You decide to take a brief stroll through the monastery's garden, where the scent of blooming rosemary mingles with the faint hum of bees busy among the lavender. The garden is your refuge, a place where the complexities of ancient laws and religious poetry fade into the steady rhythm of nature's quiet work. Back in the library, you carefully examine a set of papyrus fragments recently acquired from the eastern provinces. These fragments contain excerpts from a lost historical chronicle chronicling the reign of Emperor Justinian. The text is fragmentary, leaving gaps that invite speculation and debate among historians about the accuracy and bias of the original author. As twilight descends, you light a single oil lamp and return to your codex restoration, the flickering light casting gentle shadows on the worn pages. The rhythmic scratch of your tools and the soft rustling of parchment become a lullaby, soothing and steady. You imagine future librarians discovering your careful work, wondering about the person who labored quietly to preserve the laws that once governed a vast empire. Night falls fully, and the monastery slips into silence. You close the codex with a satisfied sigh, the day's work complete. The long, quiet life of a Byzantine librarian is one of endless small acts of care, preserving the fragile threads of history so that knowledge may endure whispered softly through the ages. The morning begins with the subtle scent of ink and dust mingling in the air as you prepare to copy a fresh text. Today's manuscript is a treat, a botanical compendium compiled by an obscure but dedicated monk, filled with detailed illustrations of plants from across the empire's diverse regions. You settle at your wooden desk quill in hand, ready to begin the slow, methodical work of transcription. You trace the delicate drawings of wild herbs and fragrant flowers, imagining the gardens of Constantinople bursting with their colors and scents. The text describes medicinal uses as well as culinary ones, suggestions for calming teas, remedies for headaches, and recipes for sweet honeyed cakes. It's a reminder that life here, even for monks and librarians, is never quite separated from the natural world. Historians still argue whether these botanical manuals were mainly practical guides or symbolic texts with hidden meanings. The copy process demands concentration. Your hand moves steadily, forming each letter with care, sometimes pausing to adjust the thickness of the ink or to add a tiny flourish. You joke softly to yourself that your handwriting could someday be mistaken for the work of an elegant calligrapher, though you suspect your skills are more functional than artistic. Yet even this slow work brings you a certain peace, a quiet rhythm to the day. A young apprentice comes by, curious about the strange names of plants, Sylphia mandrake and Asafoetida. You explain how some of these plants are nearly mythical, sought after for their healing properties, or feared for their toxic effects. The mandrake, with its forked root resembling a tiny human figure, inspired many superstitions, and you share a light-hearted tale of a scribe who once fainted upon encountering one in the garden. After a brief meal of barley porridge sweetened with dried figs, you return to examining the manuscript's pages, now focusing on the sections detailing spices and imports from far-off lands like India and Arabia. The detailed descriptions hint at a complex trade network connecting Byzantium to distant shores. These exotic goods weren't just luxuries, they shaped cuisine, medicine, and even diplomacy. In the afternoon, you're called upon to assist with cataloging new scrolls arriving from a recent shipment. Among them is a fascinating fragment of a Greek tragedy penned centuries ago but recently rediscovered. You marvel at the preservation of such fragile material, marveling quietly that even the oldest stories find new life in your hands. This fragile link between past and present feels comforting even as the day grows long and your eyelids heavy. Later, you assist in organizing the library's indexes, painstakingly cross-referencing titles and authors. The task is tedious, but your careful system keeps the vast collection accessible to scholars and monks alike. You think wryly that without this work, the library would be little more than a beautiful but useless mausoleum of knowledge. As evening falls, you light a small lamp and reflect on the manuscript's botanical illustrations, wondering about the hands that first painted them. Were they artist healers or fellow librarians? The questions linger soft and unanswered as the night wraps around you. You close your day with a few pages from a philosophical treatise on nature and the cosmos, its gentle arguments soothing your mind toward rest. Outside, the city quiets, the distant murmur of the Bosporus blending with the soft rustling of leaves in the garden. It's in these moments, amid ink parchment and fading light, that the long, quiet life of a Byzantine librarian feels truly timeless. The dawn creeps through the narrow windows of the scriptorium, casting a muted glow over your modest desk, where scattered scraps of parchment await your attention. Today, your task is to inspect a shipment of manuscripts sent from a distant provincial monastery near Mount Athos, a place famed for its austere monks and meticulous copyists. You carefully unfold a scroll, the smell of old vellum rising softly, mingling with the faint scent of beeswax from the nearby candle. You begin by running your fingers over the text, noting the unusual script style and curious marginalia, little sketches of birds and small notes scribbled by the original scribe. These doodles, historians still argue, might have served as mnemonic aids or simply as moments of distraction in long hours of copying. Either way, they bring a charming human touch to the otherwise solemn pages, reminding you that even in the most disciplined settings, playfulness finds its way. Your eyes scan the Greek text, deciphering references to a little-known local saint, whose legend involves an elaborate tale of forgiveness and miraculous healing. This saint, largely forgotten outside the monastery walls, once inspired countless pilgrims who sought solace in the shadow of the mountain. The story's gentle cadence, filled with kindness and quiet miracles, seems like a balm for restless souls. No wonder it found a place in the scribe's carefully curated collection. As you work, a fellow librarian brings you a small pot of rose water, a luxury imported from the eastern provinces. You splash a few drops on your wrists and the back of your neck, enjoying the light floral scent that lingers, easing the slow weariness of your task. It's a small pleasure, a secret indulgence in the otherwise ascetic life of a Byzantine librarian. Your midday meal is simple but flavorful lentil soup, seasoned with herbs gathered from the monastery's garden, accompanied by dense, crusty bread. You savor the warmth of the soup, appreciating the way these humble foods sustain you through the long hours. It's a reminder that the body and mind require nourishment in equal measure, something often overlooked in tales of monastic austerity. In the afternoon, you shift your focus to a ledger documenting the library's acquisitions over the past century. The entries provide a fascinating glimpse into the ebb and flow of texts, some lost, some gifted, and others purchased with careful negotiation. You find mention of rare manuscripts from Egypt, including fragments of classical Greek philosophy, long thought vanished. You pause, thinking about the fragile journey these manuscripts must have taken across seas and deserts before resting here in your care. The library isn't just a repository of words, it's a crossroads of cultures and centuries, a quiet witness to the vast tapestry of human history. Later, you run your hands over a series of illustrated medical texts, their pages filled with detailed diagrams of herbs, surgical instruments, and even early anatomical sketches. These books are prized possessions essential for the monastery's small infirmary, where the monks tend to ailments with both faith and fledgling science. You recall a fringe theory suggesting some of these medical illustrations might have influenced early Renaissance artists, a tantalizing thought that still divides scholars. As twilight settles, you return the scrolls to their shelves, carefully wrapping each to protect them from the night's chill. The library feels alive in the fading light, the accumulated knowledge a silent companion, to your quiet existence. Before extinguishing your lamp, you read a few lines from a poetic ode celebrating the changing seasons, a gentle reminder that time flows ever onward, carrying the stories you preserve into the future softly and without haste. The chill of early morning seeps through the stone walls as you begin your day, organizing the library's collection of legal texts. These dusty tomes, bound in leather and heavy with centuries of precedent, hold the quietly complex world of Byzantine law, a blend of Roman tradition and Christian morality. You carefully open a volume, its pages yellowed but intact, and trace the elegant script outlining regulations on everything from property rights to peculiar trade restrictions. You chuckle softly to yourself when you reach a section detailing the curious rules for beard length among imperial officials. Apparently, your beard could affect your promotion prospects. Historians still argue whether these grooming standards were practical measures or merely symbolic displays of loyalty and discipline. Either way, it's a reminder that even the most serious matters had room for a bit of vanity. As you pore over these laws, you stumble upon an oddly specific ordinance forbidding the wearing of silk shoes by common merchants. Silk, you remind yourself, was a luxury carefully guarded by the imperial court, its production shrouded in secrecy. The silk roots stretched far and wide, and the fabric's shimmering allure made it a prized symbol of status and power. You imagine the soft whisper of silk against marble floors in the great halls of Constantinople, a sound so delicate yet so charged with meaning. The very fabric seems to weave together the empire's vast reach from the mulberry groves of Asia to the bustling markets of the capital. After a humble lunch of salted fish and barley bread, you turn your attention to a collection of letters penned by a forgotten Byzantine empress. Her correspondence reveals a woman both politically astute and personally tender, weaving between statecraft and intimate reflection. It's fascinating how these personal writings offer a counterpoint to the grand historical narratives, proof that even rulers had quiet moments of doubt and hope. Later, a junior librarian arrives with news of a newly acquired manuscript detailing Byzantine naval practices. You flip through the pages, fascinated by the diagrams of Dromon's sleek warships equipped with flamethrowers and rams. The precision of these illustrations speaks to the meticulous nature of Byzantine military knowledge, a blend of tradition and innovation. In the late afternoon, you attend a quiet discussion among fellow librarians about the accuracy of certain historical chronicles. Scholars remain divided on whether some accounts were shaped more by political propaganda than factual reporting. These debates animate your evenings, reminding you that history is never truly settled. As dusk falls, you take a moment to walk through the dim corridors of the library, the scent of aged parchment filling your lungs. You pause by a window overlooking the city's rooftops, watching the golden light fade into deep blues and purples. Before retiring, you scribble a brief note in your journal, a habit you've cultivated to track the day's discoveries and musings. Tonight's entry muses on the delicate balance between power and personal expression, a theme woven subtly through the laws and letters you've encountered. You blow out your candle and settle into bed, the quiet murmur of the city a lullaby as you drift toward sleep, your mind wrapped in the soft folds of history. Morning light filters in through the lattice windows as you prepare to catalog a recent donation, a bundle of illuminated manuscripts from a monastery nestled in the Armenian highlands. These texts, richly decorated with vibrant colors and gold leaf, capture scenes of biblical stories intertwined with local folklore. You gently turn the pages, admiring the delicate artistry and the unique blend of Christian iconography with ancient regional motifs. The colors are surprisingly vivid for their age, and you marvel at the skill of the anonymous artists who managed to infuse such life into each illustration. Historians still argue whether these illuminations were primarily devotional tools or subtle expressions of cultural identity, but to you, they feel like windows into a world where faith and local tradition dance in quiet harmony. Among the texts, you find references to an ancient harvest festival celebrated by the monks involving ritual bread baking and the sharing of wine, a practice believed to bless the crops and the community. It's a tender reminder of how daily rhythms and sacred observances were intertwined in these remote places. You take a break to sip some watered-down wine from a small ceramic cup, a rarity saved for special occasions. The warmth spreads slowly through you, a subtle comfort, as you continue your work. Your stomach grumbles softly, reminding you it's time for the simple midday meal of fresh cheese and olive staples that have sustained monks and scribes alike for generations. After eating, you turn to a fragile scroll detailing local medicinal herbs, some of which you recognize from your own modest garden. The text includes recipes for poultices and infusions alongside curious side notes. One claims that a particular herb can soothe both headaches and homesickness, an assertion you file away with a smile. The afternoon finds you reading an old treatise on Byzantine astronomy, filled with carefully drawn diagrams of stars and planets. The treatise reflects a world where science and spirituality walked hand in hand, guiding travelers and scholars alike through the mysteries of the night sky. Later, you hear the faint sounds of a nearby church bell tolling the evening prayer, a gentle reminder of the day's close. You look up from your manuscripts to find a young apprentice quietly observing your work, eager to learn the patient art of preservation. Before nightfall, you carefully wrap the Armenian manuscripts in soft linen and place them on their shelf, feeling the weight of centuries resting in your hands. You settle by the window, letting the cool night air drift in as your thoughts wander to those distant monks whose devotion shaped these treasured texts. With the candle flickering low, you trace your fingers over the worn binding of a favorite book, feeling connected to a long line of caretakers who have, like you, preserved the past for the future. You wake to the faint clatter of carts on cobblestones outside the library, signaling the start of the bustling day in Constantinople. Today you've been tasked with organizing a shipment of papyrus scrolls arriving from Egypt, fresh from the famed libraries of Alexandria. Handling these delicate documents feels like touching strands of sunlight captured and rolled into words. As you unroll the scrolls, you notice the faint scent of the Nile's delta mingling with the dust, a sensory thread connecting distant worlds. You marvel at the smoothness of the papyrus and the fluidity of the Greek script inscribed upon it. The Egyptians were masters of papyrus production, and Byzantine scribes depended on this fragile material for the transmission of knowledge. Among the scrolls, a particularly curious text catches your eye, an ancient recipe for perfumes using ingredients like myrrh, frankincense, and rare flowers. You imagine the fragrant aromas wafting through imperial courts, marking moments of celebration and quiet reflection. Historians still argue whether these perfumes were purely cosmetic or had deeper symbolic or even medicinal roles in Byzantine society. You set aside the scrolls, carefully noting the meticulous care taken by Egyptian scribes to preserve these recipes across generations. It's a testament to the shared cultural heritage that flowed along trade routes like lifeblood through the empire. For lunch, you nibble on some dried figs and fresh goat cheese, imagining yourself seated beside a Nile riverbank, watching boats drift lazily under a blazing sun. The simple meal feels like a humble tribute to the interconnectedness of the ancient Mediterranean world. In the afternoon, you turn your attention to cataloging a collection of Byzantine medical texts. These manuscripts contain surprisingly advanced theories about anatomy and herbal remedies. One passage in particular describes the treatment of common ailments with a mix of prayer and natural substances, blending science and spirituality seamlessly. You hear the soft footsteps of a fellow librarian and share a quiet joke about how the Byzantine medical system probably wouldn't pass today's bedside manner test, a light moment amid the serious work of preservation. As twilight approaches, you find yourself reflecting on the enduring legacy of these texts. How many hands have touched these scrolls? How many minds have pondered their words? You sense that your own quiet dedication threads you into this unbroken chain. Before the candle burns low, you pause at a window, watching the orange glow of lamps flickering across the cityscape. The sounds of distant chatter and soft music drift upward, mingling with the scent of blooming jasmine. You tuck the last scroll into its protective case and lean back your thoughts, drifting toward the fragile, luminous beauty of knowledge preserved through time. You begin your morning by sorting through a collection of Byzantine coins, their metal surfaces worn smooth by centuries of handling. Each coin tells a story not only of commerce, but of shifting politics, religious symbolism, and artistic trends. You carefully examine the image of Emperor Justinian's profile stamped into the silver, marveling at the subtle expression captured by ancient artisans. Coins were more than currency. They were miniature propaganda tools spreading the emperor's visage across the vast empire. Historians still argue whether the imagery helped unify the people or simply reinforced imperial authority in a subtle but pervasive way. You imagine a merchant in a distant village clutching these coins, feeling a connection to the distant capital. As you place the coins into their velvet-lined cases, you discover a peculiar one bearing the likeness of a saint you don't recognize. You make a mental note to research this forgotten figure, intrigued by the way religion and daily life intertwine in unexpected ways throughout the empire. Lunchtime arrives quietly with soft sunlight filtering through the library's tall windows. You savor a humble meal of lentil stew and flatbread, seasoned with herbs grown in the library's small courtyard garden. The scent of thyme and rosemary fills the air, a gentle reminder of the empire's Mediterranean roots. In the afternoon, you turn your focus to a recently acquired compendium on Byzantine agriculture. It describes unusual farming techniques adapted to the empire's varied landscapes, from terraced vineyards on steep hillsides to fish farming in coastal lagoons. You find yourself drawn into the rhythms of rural life, planting, harvesting, and patiently waiting for the earth to yield its bounty. You pause to chuckle softly at a footnote describing an imperial decree banning the use of certain fertilizers. Yes, even ancient bureaucracies had their quirks and concerns about proper farming practices. The late afternoon brings a group of apprentices eager to learn about manuscript illumination. You show them how to mix natural pigments and apply gold leaf, passing on the quiet art that has sustained the beauty of Byzantine books for centuries. As dusk settles, you wander through the library's corridors, your footsteps echoing softly. The familiar scent of parchment and ink surrounds you like an old friend. You pause by a window to watch the last light fading over the Bosphorus, the water's gentle waves reflecting twilight's blush. It's moments like these, quiet still, and filled with a deep sense of connection that make the long days worthwhile. You return to your desk, penning a brief note in your journal about the day's discoveries and the enduring legacy of daily life woven through coins, crops, and art. The scent of ink and beeswax greets you as you enter the scriptorium, where the soft scratch of quills fills the air. Today, you are reviewing the work of a particularly meticulous scribe whose handwriting loops gracefully across the vellum pages like gentle waves. The manuscript in question is a copy of a theological treatise debated by scholars throughout the empire. You trace the delicate letters with your fingers, marveling at the scribe's patience and precision, each stroke a tiny act of devotion. Historians still argue whether scribes were primarily motivated by religious piety or simply the desire for employment, but from where you sit, it feels like a mix of both. In the margins, you spot tiny doodles, whimsical birds, and curious faces that break the solemnity of the text. These marginalia offer a glimpse into the personality of the scribe, a quiet rebellion against the strict formality of their work. You smile at the thought of these ancient artists leaving playful signatures for future readers. Your midday meal is a simple affair: boiled eggs with honeyed bread, enjoyed under the shade of a fig tree in the cloistered garden. The soft buzz of bees and the gentle rustle of leaves create a peaceful soundtrack to your break. Returning indoors, you delve into a collection of letters exchanged between Byzantine officials. These correspondence snippets reveal a surprisingly human side of empire-building complaints about faulty sandals, worries over a missed shipment of spices, even gossip about court intrigue. Later, you examine a worn parchment detailing unusual local laws, including one that mandated the wearing of certain colors on market days, a curious blend of social control and festive tradition. You muse on how such rules shaped community identity and behavior in subtle ways. As the afternoon light softens, you watch the apprentice struggling to master the art of gilding. You offer gentle encouragement, recalling your own fumbling first attempts decades ago. Evening descends quietly, and you find yourself lingering by the window, watching flickering lanterns illuminate the narrow streets below. The world outside buzzes softly with life, but inside the library, time seems to slow to the rhythm of turning pages and whispered prayers. You tuck away the manuscript and light a small lamp, preparing for another night of steady, patient work amid the quiet companionship of ink and parchment. You wake to a cool breeze drifting through the open window, carrying the faint scent of salt from the nearby sea. Today, you've been invited to oversee a delicate conservation project, restoring a collection of fragile silk manuscripts that once adorned the shelves of the imperial palace. The silks are as soft as whispers embroidered with golden threads that shimmer faintly, even in the dim library light. The use of silk in Byzantine manuscripts is a rare and precious practice, blending artistry and luxury in equal measure. You carefully unroll one fragment, tracing the faded designs that tell stories of imperial ceremonies and divine visions. Historians still argue whether silk manuscripts were intended primarily for public display or private devotion, but either way, they remain exquisite relics of Byzantine culture. As you work, you learn of an ancient technique called gold leafing, where artisans would painstakingly apply thin sheets of gold to the silk's surface, creating a luminous effect that catches the eye and reflects the sun's rays. You imagine these manuscripts sparkling in candlelight during quiet evening readings. Midday arrives, and you enjoy a modest meal of roasted chickpeas and fresh olives sitting beneath a grapevine trellis in the courtyard. The gentle chatter of birds accompanies your lunch, a peaceful interlude in the day's careful work. Later, you examine a recently donated manuscript describing Byzantine maritime trade routes. The text outlines the silk routes that linked Constantinople to distant cities like Samarkand and Chang'an, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and stories. The sheer scope of these networks never ceases to amaze you. You share a smile with a colleague as you compare notes on the curious sea monsters illustrated in some nautical maps, an artistic flourish perhaps, or a medieval warning about unknown dangers. Historians still argue about their true significance. As dusk settles, you watch the light fade behind the domes of Hagia Sophia, the city's silhouette glowing softly against the darkening sky. You feel a profound sense of connection to generations of librarians who have cared for these treasures before you. The day ends with the soothing scratch of your pen as you record your observations, your thoughts drifting gently like the silken threads you've handled. You rise early to the quiet hum of the city, awakening the air tinged with the aroma of fresh bread from nearby ovens. Today's task takes you beyond the library walls to the bustling marketplace, where vendors hawk goods from distant lands, spices, textiles, and rare manuscripts wrapped carefully in cloth. As you weave through the crowd, you can't help but notice the mix of languages, Greek, Syriac, Arabic, echoing in the open air. This lively hub exemplifies the cultural crossroads Byzantium thrived upon, a mosaic of influences reflected in its vast literary collections. You recall how many manuscripts in the library bear marginal notes in these very languages, a testament to the empire's cosmopolitan nature. You pause at a vendor selling papyrus scrolls imported from Egypt, marveling at their fragile texture. Papyrus was an older writing material by Byzantine times, replaced largely by parchment, yet still prized for certain documents. Historians still argue whether the transition from papyrus to parchment was driven by durability needs or trade disruptions. Your midday meal is shared with a group of scholars beneath the shade of a fig tree, roasted fava beans, soft cheese, and sweet dates, a humble feast that fuels lively conversation about recent discoveries in manuscript restoration. Afterward, you accompany a merchant to a warehouse storing bundles of parchments and codices destined for distant monasteries. You inspect seals and shipping manifests, noting the care taken to protect these cultural treasures from damp and pests during long voyages. As twilight falls, you return to the library with a bundle of new acquisitions tucked under your arm. The familiar scent of old leather and ink welcomes you home, a comforting embrace after a day amidst the city's vibrant chaos. Settling at your desk, you begin cataloging the latest editions, your mind drifting to the countless hands that once held these pages, each one a silent witness to Byzantium's enduring story. Night has settled softly over the city, and you find yourself once again in the quiet sanctuary of the library. The flicker of candlelight casts gentle shadows on the rows of books and scrolls surrounding you, and the familiar scent of aged parchment is both soothing and inspiring. Tonight you prepare the library for its final rest, a nightly ritual passed down through generations. You move slowly, carefully, closing heavy wooden shutters to keep out the chill and the occasional stray cat seeking refuge. The library feels like a living being itself, breathing quietly with each turn of the page and whisper of wind through ancient halls. As you arrange the manuscripts on their shelves, you reflect on the peculiar punishments recorded in some dusty tomes, like the curious rule that scribes who made errors in copying were sometimes made to recite their mistakes aloud in public. Such practices seem gentle, even humorous by today's standards, a far cry from harsher punishments elsewhere. Historians still argue whether these disciplinary methods truly encouraged accuracy or simply entertained the public. Your fingers linger on a well-worn volume recounting the life of a lesser-known Byzantine empress who loved to host elaborate garden parties, blending politics with poetry beneath blooming orange trees. Her story feels like a whispered secret amid the grand tales of emperors and generals. The night deepens, and you light a final oil lamp. The steady glow illuminates your workspace, inviting quiet contemplation. Outside, the muffled sounds of the sleeping city drift faintly, a lullaby for the diligent guardian of knowledge. You settle into your chair, opening a fresh manuscript and letting your eyes trace the flowing script. The world fades away, replaced by centuries of stories gently unfolding. Now, as the candle's flame flickers low, you feel the quiet pulse of the library surrounding you like a soft embrace. The weight of centuries rests gently on these shelves, filled with stories told and retold, letters penned by thoughtful hands in pages kissed by time's gentle breath. Each book is a quiet friend waiting patiently for you to drift into their worlds. Breathe in the calm, the cool hush of ink and paper mingling with the fading light. Imagine the soft rustle of vellum, the faint scratch of quills long at rest, and the distant murmur of ancient voices whispering through the walls. The city outside has slowed its bright chaos, softened to a gentle hum, just as your thoughts begin to settle, like leaves drifting on a still pond. You have walked through history's gentle corridors, met the silent guardians of knowledge, and glimpsed moments both grand and quietly human. Now the stories nestle softly in your mind, like a lullaby inviting you to rest. Let your eyes grow heavy, and your breath deepen, carried by the steady rhythm of time itself. The long, quiet lives of Byzantine librarians have folded their pages closed for the night, and now so can you. Sleep well wrapped in the warm comfort of stories that span centuries.